Today we're in Florence, Arizona, and behind me is Poston Butte. Now it's not a large mountain, but at its summit is the tomb of the man who's considered to be the father of Arizona. Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. We're about to head up this mountain behind me. And this mountain was once called Primrose and also F Mountain. It has a large F on it for the town of Florence. But today it's called Poston Butte. And it's named for Charles Poston. You can probably see this pyramid-shaped object on the top of the mountain. That's actually Mr. Poston's tomb. Now he was quite the colorful character, but he's also considered the father of Arizona. So let's start heading up the mountain and we'll talk about him and talk about why he's the father of Arizona. So from what I've read, the trail up Poston Butte isn't very long. This is the only high ground in the area, so it should have some pretty good views from the top though. As we head up, I'm going to try to briefly tell the story of Charles Poston, but he definitely led quite the life. He studied law, became a miner, had to escape the Apaches, was elected to Congress, worshipped an ancient sun god, and even has a small connection to Ronald Reagan. Charles Poston was born in Kentucky in 1825. There he studied law and eventually moved to Nashville to clerk for the Tennessee State Supreme Court. Like a lot of young men at the time, he couldn't resist the promise of riches in California during the gold rush and ended up in San Francisco in 1851. In 1853, he joined an expedition that was heading to the territory that Mexico expected to sell to the United States as part of the Gadsden Purchase. That is today southern Arizona and New Mexico. The ship Poston took from San Francisco ended up shipwrecking in Sonora, Mexico, but he eventually made it to what is now southern Arizona, where his expedition took mineral samples and traveled down the Gila River towards Fort Yuma. At this time, there were virtually no Americans or Mexicans north of the Gila River in what is now Arizona. After heading to the East Coast to raise capital for his mining ventures, Poston returned to Arizona in 1856 as the managing supervisor of the Sonora Exploring and Mining Company. They set up their company headquarters in the town of Tubac, where Poston became known as Colonel Poston. Using the authority granted to him by the government of the New Mexico Territory, Poston began printing his own money and officiated over marriages, divorces, and the baptisms of children. Eventually, someone was sent from Santa Fe and put a stop to that. With the American Civil War starting in 1861, Union troops were pulled out of the area, which led to an increase in hostilities with the Apaches. Eventually, Tubac had to be abandoned, and Poston fled the territory, barely escaping with his life. The tomb is really starting to come into view, and with this being the only high spot in the area, the views are starting to get pretty impressive. Poston headed to Washington, D.C., where he worked as a civilian aide to a Union general, and during that time he met President Abraham Lincoln, and lobbied both him and Congress to split the New Mexico Territory and create a separate Arizona Territory. The efforts worked, and on February 24, 1863, the Arizona Territory was established. In 1864, Poston was elected to be Arizona's first delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives. After serving one term, he lost his re-election bid and then traveled the world, heading to Europe, China, India, and Egypt. In 1877, Poston was made Registrar of the United States Land Office here in Florence, and that's where this hill comes into the story. At some point, Poston became a follower of Zoroastrianism, which is an ancient Persian religion, and he decided he wanted to build a temple on top of this mountain. Using his own money, he financed the building of a road to the top, the same road we're walking up now, but he ran out of money before he could build the actual temple. He apparently even wrote a letter to the Shah of Iran asking for money for the temple, but no money ever came. After his time in Florence, he did a variety of jobs around the territory and died in Phoenix in 1902. In an interesting bit of trivia, Ronald Reagan played Charles Poston in an episode of Death Valley Days in what ended up being the future president's final acting role. Wow, check out this view from up here. And there is the summit and Charles Poston's tomb. We've made it to the top of Poston Butte and to the tomb of Charles Poston. Now, this was not a very long hike, but it was definitely pretty steep. But now that we're up here, I'm excited to take a look at the tomb and also this amazing view. This monument was built and Poston's remains were moved here from Phoenix in 1925. The reason the stone says 1907 on it is because the stone was originally placed on his grave in Phoenix by the Daughters of the American Revolution and was moved here along with his remains in 1925. All of the stones for this monument were apparently found on this hill, and the actual monument was built using prison labor. All in all, I think this is a pretty interesting monument to a man that had a pretty interesting life. So that's our look at Charles Poston, the father of Arizona, and the mountain that holds his tomb. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.